In this video, after leaving the islands and lands of the South Atlantic and South Indian Oceans that I looked at in the previous video, I'm going to be picking up the alignment in Matara at the southern end of Sri Lanka and following the alignment where it crosses through the center of the island country of Sri Lanka and on over the Palk Strait into India, where I track the alignment all the way through to Pakistan, and share what I found along the way, both in terms of physical infrastructure and what our official narrative has to say about it. My name is Michelle Gibson. I did a 23-part series in 2020 called Sacred Geometry, Ley Lines, and Places in Alignment, in which I tracked a long-distance alignment of cities and places that started in San Francisco, from which most of the research in this video came, and this video is based on the last parts of the original series. So far in 2024, these recent videos I have uploaded are based on the original 2020 series. I have put together many different pieces of the puzzle I have collected over the years for your consideration from the process of tracking cities and places in several different alignments. I have found this type of geographically focused research yields a considerable amount of information that is not immediately apparent when looking at places in isolation from each other. The next stop on the alignment I have been tracking in this series is Matara, a major commercial hub and city in Sri Lanka's southern province. Matara historically is part of an area that was known as the Kingdom or Principality of Rohana, or Ruhunu, one of the three kingdoms of what is known in the present day as Sri Lanka, and known in the past as Ceylon. We are told the Buddhist temple in the middle of town was built by the ancient kings, and is on the site of a fig tree sacred to and protected by the Buddhists who live here. In the 16th through 18th centuries, we are told Matara was ruled by the Portuguese and Dutch, respectively. The Portuguese rule of Matara was said to have been ruthless, during which time they were said to have plundered and ransacked buildings, storehouses, and shrines. The Dutch were said to have captured Matara from the Portuguese in 1640. There is a section of Matara called Fort, between the ocean and the Nilwala River. The Matara fort was said to have been built by the Portuguese in 1560 and largely rebuilt by the Dutch in 1640, an illustration of which is pictured on the left, and on the right is all that remains of the Matara fort today, though it is the location of the administrative center of the entire Matara district. Directly across the Nilwala River from the remains of the Matara fort is what is actually called Star Fort Matara on Google Earth. The Dutch were said to have built the Star Fort Matara between 1761 and 1765 to protect the main fort from attacks originating from the river. At the top of the entrance to the Star Fort, the VOC symbol of the Dutch East India Company is prominently and permanently engraved. It is far easier to add engravings than build a structure of this nature and size. I typically find star forts in pairs and clusters on alignments all over the Earth, and believe they were not military in nature as we've been taught. I think they functioned as part of the electrical circuitry of the Earth's worldwide grid system. One of the definitions of the word battery is a device that produces electricity that may have several primary or secondary cells arranged in parallel or series, as well as a battery source of energy, which provides a push or a voltage of energy to get the current flowing in a circuit. The Matara clock tower is situated on the rampart of the Matara fort in the fort section of Matara, and was said to have been built by the Dutch in 1765. This is one of the massive gates of the Matara fort. What is called the Old Noop Market or Old Dutch Market in Matara was said to have been built by the Dutch in 1784. Today it is part of the Ruhunu Cultural Center. I am interested in what looks like a water tower made of stone pictured behind the front of the market. I'm having a hard time finding information about it. I will just leave this picture here of it from the Google Earth Street View. I'm drawn to look into an area right next to Matara, now called Dondra, but was historically called Devinuwara or Duwandara, an historic temple port town. It is said to mean God's city or God's port in the Sinhalese language. And indeed, one of the most celebrated religious sites of the island, with 1,000 Hindu and Buddhist statues at one time, the ruins of Hindu shrines, and a Buddhist temple. Sri Lanka's tallest lighthouse is located here. It is 161 feet or 49 meters tall, and said to have been designed and built by two English engineers, starting in 1887, first lit in 1889, and opened in 1890. This picture was said to have been taken circa 1890. Now, let's just take a picture of ourselves beside the lighthouse, and no one will know the difference. Not only that, we are told the granite used in its construction was said to have come from Scotland and Cornwall, and the bricks and steel from England. Next, I'm picking up the alignment at Adams Peak, located in the southern reaches of Sri Lanka's Central Highlands. It is described as a tall, conical mountain. Well known for the Sri Pada, or sacred footprint, near the summit, revered as a holy site in Buddhist tradition to be the footprint of the Buddha, in Hindu tradition the footprint of Shiva, or Hanuman, and in some Christian and Islamic traditions that of Adam, or Saint Thomas. It is an important pilgrimage site. The greater part of the track leading from the base to the summit consists of thousands of steps. The region along the mountain is a wildlife reserve, home for species like elephants and leopards. The districts to the south and east of Adams Peak yield gemstones, for which the island of Sri Lanka is famous. The next place I'm going to take a look at on this alignment is Kandy, a major city in Sri Lanka, and the last capital of the ancient kings era of Sri Lanka. The kingdom of Kandy was said to have been founded in 1469. This map is described to be that of Sri Lanka in the 1520s, known previously as Ceylon. In 1592, Kandy became the capital city of the last remaining independent kingdom in Ceylon after the coast regions had been conquered by the Portuguese. From that time, the kingdom of Kandy kept the Portuguese and Dutch East India Company at bay, but succumbed finally to British colonial rule when the kingdom was absorbed into the British Empire as a protectorate via the Kandyan Convention of 1815, an agreement signed between the British and members of the King's Court which ceded the kingdom's territory to British rule, and the last king was imprisoned. Ceylon was a British protectorate until its independence in 1948, and the name of the country was changed to Sri Lanka when it became a republic in 1972. The Kandyan Convention was signed in the Temple of the Sacred Tooth Relic, also known simply as the Temple of the Tooth. It houses the tooth of the Buddha, venerated as the Buddha's only surviving relic. It is believed that whoever holds the relic holds the governance of the country. The Temple of the Tooth, or Sri Dalada Malagawa, is part of the royal palace complex of the former kingdom of Kandy, located on a canal. Extending from Kandy Lake, also known as the Kiri Muhuda, or Sea of Milk, an artificial lake and said to have been built next to the Temple of the Tooth by the last king of Kandy in 1807. The Royal Audience Hall, or Magul Madua, was where the king met his ministers and carried out his daily administrative tasks, as well as being a center of religious and national festivities connected with the Kandyan court. There were at least 3-star forts in Sri Lanka's interior region between Kandy and the coast. One was called the Sinhalese Sitawaka Fort, which was adjoined with the palace of the king of Sitawaka. Both the palace and the fort were destroyed by the Portuguese in our historical narrative. The Ruanwela Fort was said to have been constructed first as a wooden structure by the Dutch around 1665. Today it is being used as a police station. Then there was the Hanwela Fort, located at the site of an ancient ferry crossing on the Kalani River. We are told that the fort was thought to have been originally constructed by King Mayadun of Sitawaka, who ruled between 1521 and 1581. Then, we are told, the Portuguese occupied the fort in 1597 and rebuilt it. The Dutch were said to have captured it and constructed a star-shaped fort, completing the work in 1684. Eventually the fort came under the control of the British in 1786, and little evidence of the fort remains with the exception of remnants of the fortifications and the moat. This is a rest house said to have been built by the Dutch where the fort was. That was even visited by the Prince of Wales, Albert Edward, in 1875, who, we are told, planted a jackfruit tree on the site to commemorate his visit to Ceylon, and the tree, and 2 stone seats said to have been constructed for the royal visit, are still on the site. The jackfruit is the national fruit of Sri Lanka and is native to that part of South Asia. Sri Lanka is one of the few places that I know of to have an acknowledged ethnic minority group called Moors. They comprise 9.2% of the population, which is approximately a population of 1.9 million Moors in the country, with Kandy being one of their population centers. They are mainly native speakers of the Tamil language, with the influence of Sinhalese and Arabic words. The Moors of Sri Lanka are predominantly followers of Islam and are also matrilineal, in which kinship is traced and great influence is held by women. This book is a study about Muslim, Sinhalese, and Tamil households in Sri Lanka. So how did that happen, according to what we are told in our narrative? For one thing, the Moors were matrilineal and not patriarchal, a civilization which has been left out of the history books, including the ancient Wachita Moors of North America. The Wachita are ruled by an empress to this day. Yes, the Wachita, also known as the Ancient Ones, are still very much here with us today. Sigiriya is described as an ancient rock fortress near Dambulla in Sri Lanka's central province. It is dominated by Lion Rock. King Kashyapa was said to have built his palace between 477 and 495 AD on top of Lion Rock, which he had decided to make his new capital. There are 1,200 steps going to the top of Lion Rock, starting from where we are told he built a gateway in the form of enormous lion paws. It reminds me visually of the stone of El Piñol that I found tracking in alignment in Guanape, Colombia, in South America. This is a view of the water gardens of Sigiriya from the summit of Lion Rock. They are built symmetrically on an east-west axis connected with the outer moat to the west, and the large artificial lake to the south of Lion Rock. All the pools are interlinked using an underground conduit network fed by the lake and connected to the moats. The mirror wall is located in the mid-level terrace where the lion's entrance is located, and was said to have been originally so highly polished that the king could see himself while he walked alongside it. A spiral staircase at the mirror wall leads to fresco paintings depicting women that cover most of the western face of the rock, called the largest picture gallery in the world. After all the work that King Kashyapa put into this place, we are told the capital and royal palace were abandoned after his death, and that it was used as a Buddhist monastery until the 14th century. Sigiriya is listed as a UNESCO World Heritage Site and is considered one of the best preserved examples of urban planning in the world. Jaffna is the next place on the alignment and is the capital city of Sri Lanka's northern province. It is the administrative headquarters of the Jaffna district on the peninsula of the same name. Jaffna is located 6 miles or 9.7 kilometers from Kandarodai, a famous emporium city and capital of Tamil kingdoms in northeastern Ceylon from classical antiquity, and the location of the ancient Buddhist monastery known as Kudarugoda Vihara. Jaffna and the surrounding region was part of Naga Nadu and inhabited by one of the ancient tribes of Ceylon, the Nagas, generally represented as a class of superhumans. Also called serpents of wisdom, Nagas were masters of raising serpent-like kundalini energy from the base of the spine to the third eye, connecting with higher self in physical form. And masters of higher human abilities, called siddhis. Jaffna was said to have been made into a colonial port town by the Portuguese around 1618, at which time they were said to have built the Jaffna Fort. Fort Hammonheil, said to have been built in 1618, around a small island between 2 other islands on the Jaffna Peninsula. The Kates Island Fort in 1629. The Delft Island Fort is attributed to the Portuguese sometime during that same time period. And the Punarin Fort, just adjacent to the Jaffna Peninsula. The forts on the Jaffna Peninsula at Kankasanturai, Point Pedro, Pil, Bashuter, and Elephant Pass were all completely destroyed at some point in time during colonial times. Then the Portuguese lost Jaffna to the Dutch East India Company in 1658, the world's most valuable company of all time, worth $7.9 trillion. The Dutch were said to have lost their possessions in Sri Lanka in 1796, when they were taken over by the British, after which time the British were said to have built the major roads and railways connecting Jaffna with Kandy, Colombo, and the rest of the country. With the Ceylon Government Railway having been founded in 1858, and the rail network introduced by the British colonial government in 1864. This is said to be a picture circa 1880 of a steam-powered train on the hill country Colombo-Badula line. This is the Jaffna railway station today, said to have been built originally in 1902 and reconstructed in the time frame around 2011 through 2013. due to damage it sustained during Sri Lanka's civil war in the years between 1983 and 1995. The Jaffna Public Library was said to have originally been built in 1933 and one of the largest libraries in Asia, with over 97,000 books and manuscripts. Built in what was called an Indo-Saracenic style, we are told it was burned down by an organized mob in 1981. After I first uploaded this same information in a video in 2020, this comment was left by a viewer on my YouTube channel about the burning of the Jaffna Public Library in 1981. The alignment from Jaffna crosses the Palk Strait, located between the Jaffna district of the northern province of Sri Lanka and the Tamil Nadu state of India. It connects the Bay of Bengal, the largest bay in the world at 839,000 square miles or 2,172,000 square kilometers, with Palk Bay to the southwest. The chain of low islands and reefs called Adams Bridge, also known as Rama's Bridge or Ramsetu, which separates the Gulf of Mannar, known for having one of the most productive pearl fisheries in the world, from Palk Bay. This is a depiction I found of what this place might have looked like when it connected India and Sri Lanka circa 1480, as we're told, at which time supposedly a cyclone deepened the channels between the two places. At any rate, the Pamban Bridge, a railway bridge, connects the town of Mandapam in Tamil Nadu with Pamban Island and Ramaswaram to the Indian railways, ending at the Indian side of Adams Bridge. It was said to have been constructed between 1911 and 1914, which was the year World War I started. It is over a mile long at 6,776 feet, or 2,065 meters. Described as a masterpiece of engineering, it has a movable section midway that is raised to allow ship and barge traffic to pass through. There are similar movable sections on the Sault Ste. Marie International Railroad Bridge, with a swing bridge and a vertical lift bridge. It was said to have been built in 1887. For perspective in the historical narrative we have been taught, the Model T Ford first came into production in 1908. And the Wright brothers had their first flight at Kitty Hawk in North Carolina's Outer Banks in 1903. So were we actually capable of these amazing engineering feats like these based on the technology we are taught existed at those times? And what in the world was going on in 1887, the year the Sault Ste. Marie International Railroad Bridge was said to have been built? Well, for one, Buffalo Bill took his Wild West show to Great Britain for the celebration of the Jubilee year of Queen Victoria in 1887. Back to Palk Bay, you can take a ferry across in the same general location as the sunken parts of Adams Bridge to Talamanar on Sri Lanka's Mannar Island, and catch the train onto anywhere you want to go in Sri Lanka. The Palk Bay and Palk Strait were named for Sir Robert Palk, an officer in the British East India Company that served as the governor of Madras between 1755 and 1763, during the time period called the Company Raj or Company Rule in India, when the British East India Company ruled over parts of the Indian subcontinent between 1757 and 1858. Commencing after the 1757 Battle of Plassey, called a decisive victory over the Nawab of Bengal, Mir Jafar, after which time the Nawab ceded revenues to what was called the Company. Mir Jafar was considered the first dependent Nawab of Bengal of the British East India Company, and this was considered to be the start of British imperialism in India, and a key step in the eventual British domination of vast areas there. The next place I come to tracking the alignment from Jaffna is Vellore, a city and administrative headquarters of the Vellore district in the northeastern part of the Indian state of Tamil Nadu. It is located on the banks of the dry-looking Palar River today, which historically flowed from the Nandi Hills, also known as Nandidurg, an ancient hilltop fortress in Karnataka state that was at one time believed to have been impregnable, but was successfully stormed by the army of Charles Cornwallis in 1791, the first Marquess of Cornwallis in the Third Anglo-Mysore War, a conflict in South India between the British East India Company and the Kingdom of Mysore. And the same General Cornwallis, famous for being defeated at the Battle of Yorktown in 1781 and being forced to surrender, basically ending the American Revolutionary War. In spite of his loss and surrender to the Americans in the Revolutionary War, Cornwallis was knighted in 1786 and in the same year became the Governor-General and Commander-in-Chief of the British colony in India. Nandi Hills later became a resort for British Raj officials during the hot season. The Muthu Mandapam, or Pearl Hall, located on the banks of the Palar River, is the resting place of the last king of Kandy in Sri Lanka, Sri Wikrama Raja Singh, and a place where Sri Lankans journeyed to in order to pay their respects to him. He had been arrested by the British in 1815 and ended up in exile in India, which was the same ship on which the Treaty of Nanking, or Nanjing, between the British Empire and China would be signed after China's defeat after the First Opium War in 1842. The First Opium War was fought between the Qing dynasty of China and Britain between 1839 and 1842, a military engagement that started when the Chinese seized opium stocks at Canton in order to stop the opium trade, which was banned. The British government insisted upon free trade and equality among nations and backed the merchants' demands. From 1757 to 1842, the Canton system served as a means for China to control trade with the West by focusing all trade in the southern port of Canton. To counter this, the British East India Company began to grow opium in Bengal, in present-day Bangladesh, and allowed private British merchants to sell opium to Chinese smugglers for illegal sale in China. It is interesting to note that in the last video from this most recent series, called The Advanced Ancient Civilization and the Colonization of the Islands and Lands of the South Atlantic and South Indian Oceans, which was based on this same long-distance alignment I tracked back in 2020, I had mentioned that in 1793, Amsterdam Island was a stop for the Macartney mission, the first British diplomatic mission to China. While it was said to have failed to achieve its initial objectives, the Macartney mission was noted for having brought back extensive cultural, political, and geographical observations that its participants recorded. The goals of the Macartney mission were to 1. Open new ports for British trade in China, 2. The establishment of a permanent embassy in what was then called Peking, now Beijing, 3. The cession of a small island off the coast of China for Britain's use, and 4. The relaxation of trade restrictions on British merchants in Canton and southern China. So the follow-up to this event in history was also found on this alignment. Only 50 years after the Macartney mission, the First Opium War took place and Great Britain got exactly what it wanted. As a result from these events in history, opium dens, establishments where opium was sold and smoked, became prevalent in many parts of the world throughout the 19th century. Sounds like these events were the origins of the same drug trade that plagues the world today, a means by which to keep humanity asleep and unconscious as much as possible, and make a ton of money in the process. Some of the world's wealthiest families today earned a fortune engaging in the opium business, like the Astor, Forbes, Russell, Perkins, and Delano families. They don't even hide it. The Vellore Fort is situated in the heart of Vellore. Said to have been built by the Karnataka Empire that was based in the Deccan Plateau region of South India, the Vellore Fort is known for its grand ramparts, wide moat, and robust masonry. The fort's ownership was said to have passed from the Karnataka Empire to the Bijapur Sultans, to the Marathas, to the Carnatic Nawabs, and finally to the British, who held the fort until India gained independence in 1947, at which time the heart-wrenching partition of India displaced 10 to 12 million people along religious lines and created an overwhelming refugee crisis in the newly constituted independent dominions of India and Pakistan, as well as large-scale violence and death. The first significant rebellion against British rule erupted at Vellore Fort in 1806, known as the Vellore Mutiny or Vellore Sepoy Mutiny. While it only lasted one day, it was the first instance of a large-scale and violent mutiny by the Indian sepoys against the British East India Company. The sepoys seized the Vellore Fort and killed or wounded 200 British soldiers, but the mutiny was subdued by the end of the day by cavalry and artillery from another nearby British unit. The Venu Bapu Observatory in Kavator, in the Vellore district, is in what are called the Javadi Hills of the Eastern Ghats. It is the biggest observatory in Asia, with observations said to have started here in 1968. Its location 12 degrees north of the equator allows for the coverage of the northern and southern hemispheres, and it is the only major astronomical facility between Australia and South Africa for observing the southern objects. Ongoing programs include the observations of stars, star clusters, nova, supernova, blazars, galaxies, solar system objects, and many others. William Petre was an officer in the British East India Company in Madras in the 1780s. An amateur astronomer, he was given the credit for making the first modern astronomical observation outside of Europe in Madras in 1786. We are told his home observatory and instruments contributed to the first modern observatory outside of Europe, the Madras Observatory, shown here, said to have been built around 1792, with the first observations on the meridian being in 1793, said to have been designed by Michael Topping, the chief marine surveyor of Fort St. George in Madras. The Madras Observatory was described as having a single room that was 40 feet or 12 meters long and 20 feet or 6 meters wide, with a 15-foot or 5-meter high ceiling, as well as a granite pillar weighing 10 tons, or 9 metric tons, in the center of the room. A 10-ton granite pillar? Well, at any rate, the massive granite pillar still exists in the present day, with an engraving by those said to have erected it. It is on the grounds of the present-day Regional Meteorological Center in Chennai, what Madras is called today, and the original building of the Madras Observatory no longer exists, though I read other stone slabs and broken pillars are found in a fenced-off section on its grounds. Another observatory in South India is the Kodaikanal Solar Observatory, located in the Palani Hills southwest of Vellore in Tamil Nadu state. Founded in April of 1899, legend has it that the observatory's 6-inch telescope was said to have been brought on foot by 4 men who climbed steep valleys and braved the attack of wild animals, carrying the telescope on their shoulders for almost 3 months. It is interesting to note that there are abandoned observatories dotting the landscape of the hills behind Kodaikanal. In northern India, we are told that between 1724 and 1730, Jai Singh II, the Raja of Jaipur, oversaw the construction of 5 monumental stone observatories, called Jantar Mantars, across his domains. The primary purpose of these observatories was for the study of space and time. There is one in Delhi, an ancient city and the seat of the Mughal Empire. It is interesting to note that the Jantar Mantar in what is now called New Delhi is surrounded by the government buildings of India in a rather geometric-looking configuration, and which the British were said to have built New Delhi between 1911 and 1931 after the laying of the foundation stone by Emperor George V of India, a title used by British monarchs from 1876 to 1948. During the Delhi Durbar of 1911, an Indian imperial-style mass assembly organized by the British at Coronation Park to mark his accession as Emperor of India. Other Jantar Mantars are in Jaipur, a collection of 19 architectural instruments, forming the largest stone observatory in the world, including the world's largest stone sundial. In Varanasi, India, a major religious center in India and considered the holiest city of Hinduism and Jainism. In the holy city of Ujjain with 13 architectural astronomy instruments. And the Jantar Mantar of Matara, an ancient city believed to be the homeland and birthplace of Krishna. Vedic astronomy has ancient roots in India, going back thousands of years. Yet they want us to believe things like William Petre of the British East India Company, for example, brought the science of astronomy to India. One more place I would like to take a look at before leaving Tamil Nadu state is its capital in modern times, Chennai, known historically as Madras. The British East India Company arrived in Madras in 1600, making it their principal settlement, and, we are told, constructed Fort St. George in 1644, which serves today as the Secretariat and Legislative Assembly of the Tamil Nadu government. The British East India Company was said to have come here in order to have a port close to the Malaccan Straits, the main shipping channel between the Indian Ocean and the Pacific Ocean, and to secure its trade lines and commercial interest in the spice trade. It is one of the most important shipping lanes in the world. They must have succeeded in securing their goals because the British East India Company officer I mentioned previously, who is said to have made the first astronomical observations outside of Europe, William Petre, was also the governor of Prince of Wales Island in the Malaccan Strait between 1812 and 1816. Prince of Wales Island is known today as Penang Island, the main constituent island of the Malaysian state of Penang. St. Mary's Church at Fort St. George is said to be the oldest Anglican church in India, built between 1678 and 1680. And Elihu Yale, a British merchant, trader, and president of the British East India Company settlement at Fort St. George, was married at St. Mary's Church. Elihu Yale later became a benefactor of the collegiate school in the colony of Connecticut, which in 1718 was renamed Yale College in his honor. I have found the same style of architecture at universities and colleges around the world, including, but not limited to, Korea University in Seoul, Korea, the University of Sydney in Australia, and Eton College in Windsor, England. The Madras Presidency, or the Presidency of Fort St. George, was an administrative subdivision of British India, and established in 1652, and of which Elihu Yale became president in 1684. At its greatest extent, the Madras Presidency included most of southern India, including the whole of the states of Tamil Nadu and Andhra Pradesh, parts of Odisha, Kerala, and Karnataka, and the Union Territory of Lakshadweep, a group of islands off India's southwestern coast. The Madras Presidency ended with the advent of Indian independence on August 15th of 1947. We come to Hyderabad next on the alignment, the capital and largest city of India's Telangana state on the Deccan Plateau. The Deccan Plateau is bounded by the Eastern Ghats and the Western Ghats. And it is interesting to note that Ghats in India are also a series of steps leading down to water. This is a screenshot from a YouTube video I watched several years ago entitled The Eastern Ghats in Journey Through India on the left, showing this part of the subcontinent of India looking like Monument Valley in Arizona, near the border with Utah, and the American Southwest on the right. Hyderabad occupies 241 square miles, or 624 square kilometers, along the Musi River. This is a view of the Salar Jung Museum in Hyderabad, showing masonry banks on the Musi River. The Salar Jung Museum is described as having the largest collection of antiques belonging to a single person, said to have been sourced from Nawab Mir Yusuf Ali Khan Salar Jung III, former Prime Minister of the 7th Nizam, the title of the ruler of what was then the princely state of Hyderabad. The palace owned by the Nizam of Hyderabad, the Falaknuma Palace, was said to have been built in 1893 and converted into a 5-star hotel in 2010. There are 60 rooms and 22 halls inside the Falaknuma Palace, as well as a large collection of the Nizam of Hyderabad's treasures, including furniture, paintings, statues, books, and manuscripts. The official residence of the Nizams of Hyderabad was the Chamahala Palace, said to have been built starting in 1750. The Qutub Shahi tombs are located in the Ibrahim Bagh or Garden District near the Golkonda Fort in Hyderabad. We are told they are tombs and mosques that were built by the various kings of the Qutub Shahi, which ruled the Golkonda Sultanate of South India between 1518 and 1687. There are 7 tombs altogether, built of grey granite. I found this picture of a view of the Qutub Shahi tombs from the Golkonda Fort, said to date to around 1902, that brings mudflood to my mind. The Golkonda Fort is described as a 12th century citadel with 4 forts, 87 bastions, and numerous buildings. It is described as an early capital of the Qutub Shahi kings. Golkonda flourished as a trade center of large diamonds, known as Golkonda diamonds. It has produced some of the world's most famous diamonds, including the Koh-i-Noor, one of the largest cut diamonds in the world. This is a glass replica of it, because the real one is part of the British crown jewels. And the Hope Diamond, a famous blue diamond that is on exhibit at the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C. After India gained independence in 1947, the Nizam of Hyderabad, Mir Osman Ali Khan, the world's richest man of his time, declared his intention to remain independent rather than become part of the Indian Union. The Hyderabad State Congress began to agitate against him, with the support of the Indian National Congress and Communist Party of India, and in 1948, the Indian Army invaded Hyderabad, and he ended up surrendering to the Indian Union, signing an instrument of accession which made him a princely governor of Hyderabad until October 31st of 1956. Then on November 1st of 1956, Hyderabad was split into 3 parts and merged into neighboring states. Eventually, the Telangana state, of which Hyderabad is the capital, was formed on June 2nd of 2014. India was called the jewel in the crown of the British Empire, and its largest and most important overseas possession. Much of the British Empire was built around India in order to provide routes to or protection for India. India was prosperous and rich in spices, silk, indigo, gold, cotton, and other products and resources. Trade with and eventual political dominance of large parts of India was what provided Britain with large parts of its wealth in the 1700s through 1900s. Next on the alignment, we come to the Ellora Caves, located in the Aurangabad district of Maharashtra, India. A UNESCO World Heritage Site, it is one of the largest rock-cut monastery temple cave complexes in the world, featuring Hindu, Buddhist, and Jain monuments and artwork, and we are told dating to the time period of 600 to 1000 AD. The Kailasa is the largest of the rock-cut temples of the Ellora Caves. Carved from a rock cliff face, it is considered one of the most remarkable cave temples in the world because of its size, architecture, and sculptural treatments. It's the world's largest monolithic structure, meaning carved out from the rock. Examples of places in other countries with massive architecture cut directly out of rock include the 11 monolithic churches of Lalibela in Ethiopia. Here are 3 of the churches there. The roof of the Mausoleum of Theodoric outside of Ravenna in Italy is described as a single 230-ton or 209 metric ton type of limestone, which for some reason no longer has its beautiful double stone staircase. The ancient site of Petra in Jordan is also monolithic, as are the Lycian rock-cut Dalian tombs in the province of Antalya in southern Turkey. The Ajanta caves are also in the Aurangabad district of the Maharashtra state. Almost 30 rock-cut Buddhist cave monuments said to date from the 2nd century BC to about 480 AD, and believed to be among the finest surviving examples of ancient Indian art and masterpieces of Buddhist religious art. The Ajanta caves were said to have been rediscovered in 1819 by a British officer named John Smith. While hunting tigers, he was said to have discovered the door to cave number 10 when a local shepherd boy guided him to the location and the door. John Smith went to a nearby village to get help gaining entrance to the temple, after which time he vandalized the wall by scratching his name and the date over a painting on the wall. It is interesting to note that the Grand Canyon has Hindu names for some of its rock features, like the 3 Hindu gods at the Grand Canyon, as well as ones with Egyptian names, which are part of the formation of a star map of the constellation Orion. And there are stories from early explorers of the Grand Canyon, like the one of G.E. Kincaid, who claimed to have found an entrance to a mysterious underground citadel, which led to the finding of a massive chamber from which scores of passages radiated, and finding, among many other similar things, an idol sitting cross-legged with a lotus flower in each hand. An expedition to a rock-cut vault in the Grand Canyon in 1909 by a Professor S.A. Jordan of the Smithsonian received front-page coverage in the Phoenix Gazette, about which the Smithsonian in short order was said to have claimed to not have knowledge of the discovery or the discoveries. The Grand Canyon of India is in a place called Gandakota in the Andhra Pradesh state along the Pennar River. Here's a comparison of the Colorado River on the top in the vicinity of the Grand Canyon in Arizona, and the Pennar River in Gandakota in India on the bottom. Gandakota, the center of power for various dynasties, including the Golkonda Sultanate mentioned previously, also has a massive fort, built of granite, with a 20-foot or 6-meter high entry gate and a fort wall running around a 5-mile or 8-kilometer perimeter. It has 101 bastions, each about 40 feet or 12 meters high. The Belam Caves, approximately 2 hours from Gandakota in Andhra Pradesh, are the largest and longest cave system open to the public on the Indian subcontinent. The Bezeklik Thousand Buddha Caves are found in Turpan, in the Uyghur Autonomous Region of China, a complex of 77 rock-cut cave grottos said to date from between the 5th and 14th centuries, and are located in what is called the Flaming Gorge. Here is the Flaming Gorge in China compared to the appearance of Arizona's Grand Canyon. Just a short distance from the Ellora Cave Temple Complex in Kuldabad is the tomb of Aurangzeb, considered the last of the strong Mughal emperors, and who died in 1707 in our historical narrative. Aurangzeb means ornament of the throne in Persian, a Persian name for the ruler of the Mughal Empire of the Indian subcontinent. His burial site is located at the complex of the Dargah, or shrine, of Sheikh Zainuddin, a Sufi saint of the Deccan, also known as Deccan, of India, and the spiritual and religious teacher of Aurangzeb. As a matter of fact, Kuldabad is popularly known as the Valley of Saints because several Sufi saints resided there in the 14th century. Who were the Sufis? They were mystics and practitioners of the inward dimension of Islam. Sufism emphasizes personal experience with the divine and concentrating one's energy on spiritual development, rather than focusing on the teachings of human religious scholars. For example, followers of the Persian Sufi mystic Rumi from the Greater Khorasan established the Mevlevi order in Konya, Turkey, otherwise known as whirling dervishes, who practice a spinning dance used to connect with the divine. Okay, this information about the Mughal Emperor Aurangzeb having a Persian name and being a Sufi, and Rumi being a Persian from the Greater Khorasan is really nudging at my consciousness to bring in another stream of information. Some of what I'm about to share is based on things I have learned in tracking alignments over the years, and some of it is based on things I remember learning at some point in my life. I'm going to surf the synchronicities here because that is all I'm able to do. The validity of this information has gone from the official historical narrative about whether or not I am correct going in this direction. I can't definitively prove what I'm going to say, but I can bring forward something that wants to come out in a meaningful way. I have found alignments running through a region historically called the Greater Khorasan, forming the northeast province of what is called Iran today, Persia historically, and comprising the present territories of northeastern Iran, parts of Afghanistan, and much of Central Asia. Khorasan is said to mean something along the lines of land of the sun, or where the sun arrives from in Persian. Historically, modern Turkey was known as Anatolia, and also means something along the lines of rising sun in ancient Greek. Also, the land of the rising sun is a popular nickname for the country of Japan. So what this tells me is that the whole concept of the sun always rising on the empires of the ancient advanced civilization was embedded in language and collective awareness. In similar fashion, we learned that the sun never set on the British Empire. We are told that between the 18th and 20th centuries, Britain acquired more and more territories, making it the largest empire in history. When I see the Persian name of the Mughal Emperor Aurangzeb, I vaguely recollected something about the Aryans. It rang the bell of a distant memory. In looking up definitions of Aryan, here's what I'm finding. The Aryans brought Hindu religious thought to India. The term was used by the Indo-Aryan people of the Vedic period in ancient India as a religious label for themselves. The Iranian people used the term as an ethnic label for themselves in the Avesta scriptures, the religious texts of Zoroastrianism, and the word Aryan forms the source of the country name Iran. The definition of an Aryan, described by the Nazi Germans as a member of the master race, was not Jewish and had Nordic features. What exactly was the Nazi obsession with creating a master race all about? Was this actually an obsessive desire to recreate the original master race of a worldwide civilization that was destroyed in a cataclysm we haven't been told about? Giant human beings who, among many other things, were capable of creating massive monolithic stone infrastructure like it was no big deal? When I was tracking an alignment through the modern country of Turkey in the ancient region of Lake Van, I learned about the kingdom of Urartu, which was historically part of Armenia. Which brings me to the question, who were the people of Ar? Mount Ararat, the legendary landing place of Noah's Ark, was located in the historical Armenia, though now is within the boundaries of modern Turkey. The Sumerians called Ararat Arata, and they tell of this land of their ancestors in the Armenian highlands in the epic poem of Gilgamesh. Compare the boat pictured here with the Sumerian Gilgamesh on the top left, with an ancient Egyptian boat on the bottom left, a boat on Lake Titicaca in Peru on the bottom center, and a boat on Lake Chad in Africa on the right. As a matter of fact, Arata is said to be now recognized as the world's most ancient known civilization, dating back to 22,000 BCE, developing in the steppes north of the Black Sea in modern Ukraine, and believed to spread out from there to India, Mesopotamia, Egypt, Western China, and across Europe. This is the Vorontsov Palace in Alupka on the Black Sea's Crimean Peninsula, which was historically part of the Ukraine, on the left, in comparison with the Jama Masjid Mosque in Delhi, India, on the right. I found out that ancient India was known as Barata Varsha at one time. Or does the term Barata Varsha refer to the entire earth? Let's take a look at Bavaria, a state in Germany, at the Linderhof Castle, the smallest of three castles said to have been built by Mad King Ludwig II, constructed between 1863 and 1886. This is the peacock throne found inside the Linderhof Palace. And Moorish architecture is found in this amazing room inside the main Linderhof Palace. In this building located on the grounds of the Linderhof Palace called the Moorish Kiosk. This is what we're told about the Moorish Kiosk. The peacock throne of the Mughal emperor was also a famous jeweled throne. Located in the Hall of Private Audiences, at the Red Fort in Delhi, India, the main residence of the Mughal emperors. And now the Mughal peacock throne is on display at the Topkapi Palace in Istanbul, Turkey, not in India. Where else can I find ours? Tartary or Tartaria, a historical region in northern and central Asia. The Barbary Coast or Barbaria, the name given to a vast region stretching from the Nile River Delta across northern Africa to the Canary Islands. Gandhara, an ancient Buddhist kingdom primarily in what is now Pakistan and part of the Kushan Empire. Arabia, Arizona in the United States with its flag on the top compared with the flag of Tibet on the bottom, both looking very much like sun rays in the background. And Kumari Kandam, a lost continent in the Indian Ocean, to name just a few. Who were the people of Ar? Now back to India. The next place I want to take a look at on the alignment is Indore, the largest and most populated city in the Indian state of Madhya Pradesh. We are told Indore was founded in the 16th century as a trading hub between Delhi and the Deccan region of India. It was ruled as a princely state by the Holkar dynasty until they acceded to the Union of India in 1947. The first Holkar of the dynasty was Malhar Rao Holkar, who ruled from 1731 to 1766. This is the Chhatri, the definition of which is funerary monument for him that was said to have been built by his daughter-in-law, Ahilyabai Holkar, who became queen in the Holkar dynasty after the death of her husband, Matara Rao Holkar's son, Kandurao Holkar. Now compare the similarities between Malhar Rao Holkar's Chhatri on the left with the Moorish kiosk we saw previously on the grounds of the Linderhof Palace in Bavaria, Germany on the right. The Rajwada Palace in Indore was a royal residence of the Holkars, as was the Lal Bagh Palace. The Lal Bagh Palace brought to mind the Scheisler Palais in the city of Augsburg in Bavaria, Germany, which I remember visiting when I was stationed there in the army in the mid-1980s. The Mahatma Gandhi Town Hall in Indore was said to have been built in 1904, named King Edward Hall, and renamed to honor Gandhi in 1948. The Kanch Mandir in Indore is a Jain temple, said to have been built starting in 1903. Meaning temple of glass, the inside is entirely covered by glass panels and mosaics, including the floor, columns, walls, and ceilings. It is important to note that the capital of the Indian state of Madhya Pradesh is Bhopal, which is 107 miles or 172 kilometers from Indore. Bhopal was the location of the world's worst industrial disaster in December of 1984, when the Union Carbide pesticide plant there leaked highly toxic methyl isocyanate gas, which made its way into the surrounding areas. The official death toll at the time was 2,259, and this major gas leak caused over 500,000 injuries, with ongoing effects over time. One last point of information about Bhopal. Around 15 years ago, archaeologists found the remains of 21 temples near Bhopal, in the village of Ashapuri, believed to date back 1,300 years. These people were remarkably prolific builders. The next place on the alignment is Udaipur, also known as the City of the Lakes, in India's Rajasthan state. Another nickname of Udaipur is Venice of the East. We are told it was the historic capital of the Mewar Kingdom, said to have been founded in 1558 by Uda Singh II of the Sisodia clan of Rajput, after he shifted his capital from Chittorgarh, because it was besieged by the third Mughal emperor, Akbar, who reigned from 1556 to 1605. Yet I find this picture of Akbar looking more like a Sufi saint, with the light of spiritual illumination surrounding his head, than a depiction of a general who was said to have extended the influence of the Mughal Empire over almost the entire Indian subcontinent because of military, political, cultural, and economic dominance. Uda Singh II was said to have been crowned by the nobles of Mewar in 1540 in the Kumhalgarh, a Mewar fortress said to have been built in the Aravalli hills around Udaipur in the 15th century by the Mewar king Rana Kumbha. It is a UNESCO World Heritage Site included in the hill forts of Rajasthan. Uda Singh II was said to have built his new palace on a location chosen for him by a hermit he came across while looking for a place to build it, called the City Palace today. This is the entrance to the Peacock Courtyard at the City Palace, known as the Moor Chalk. This courtyard was used for royal banquets and has mosaics of peacocks on the walls surrounding the courtyard. Uda Singh II was also said to have built a 4-mile or 6-kilometer long wall with 7 gates in order to protect Udaipur from external attacks. This is one of the wall's gates, the gate of the City Palace, known as the Tripolia Pal, or Triple Gate. The area within this wall is still known as the Old City, or Walled City. This is a view of the City Palace in the Old City from Lake Pichola. Lake Pichola is described as an artificial freshwater lake that was said to have been created in 1362 by Pichu Banjara, a gypsy tribesman who transported grain during the reign of Maharana Lanka, the third Maharana of the Mewar Kingdom. Are we being told one man built this artificial lake? I looked for other references, but the available historical record consistently came back to the lake having been built by this man in the 1300s, before Udaipur was said to have even been founded. In addition, Lake Pichola has 4 artificial islands. The Jagniwas, where the Lake Palace is built, now a hotel. It was said to have been built between 1743 and 1746 under the direction of Mewar Maharana Janat Singh II. Jagmandir is an island and palace in Lake Pichola, said to have been constructed by 3 Maharanas sometime between 1551 and 1652, as well as the island of Mohan Mandir and Arsi Vilas, large masonry structures completely surrounded by water. How did they even build them in water like that? So far, the origin stories of Udaipur, contrasted with the magnificence of the architecture and infrastructure, are just not adding up. Let's take a look at some other places in Udaipur and see what we find. The Sajangarh Fort is a hilltop palatial residence in Udaipur with a panoramic view of the city's lakes, palaces, and surrounding countryside, and named after Maharana Sajan Singh, who was said to have built it in 1884. Also known as the Monsoon Palace, it was said to have been built there in order to watch the monsoon clouds. Here is a beautiful example of the symmetry, proportion, and alignment of archways and openings at Sajangarh on the top left that I have found around the world, like the Alhambra in Granada, Spain, and a classic example of Moorish architecture on the top right, the Palace of the Kings of Majorca in Perpignan in southern France on the bottom left, and in Indonesia at the Baturaman Grand Mosque in Banda Aceh on the bottom right. The Sajangarh Fort overlooks Fateh Sagar Lake, another of Udaipur's artificial lakes. Fateh Sagar Lake was said to have been built in the 1680s, but there are no details on the builders of it. Udaipur Solar Observatory is on one of 3 artificial islands in the lake. Said to have been built in 1976, it has one of the most powerful solar telescopes in the world. It was said to follow the model of the Solar Observatory at Big Bear Lake in Southern California. Debar Lake near Udaipur is India's 2nd largest artificial lake. Debar Lake was said to have been created in the 17th century by Rana Jai Singh when he built a marble dam across the Gomati River, resulting in the largest artificial lake in the world at the time. The tribe of Bil Minas inhabits all 3 islands on Debar Lake. The Bils, who speak a subgroup of the western zone of the Indo-Aryan languages, are one of the largest indigenous groups in India, as well as among the most economically deprived peoples of India. This is interesting to note because they are among the oldest communities in India and were inhabitants of the ancient Indus River Valley civilization. As a matter of fact, the ruins of Balatai in the Udaipur district were from what was connected to the Ahar Banas culture of the Harappans of the Indus River Valley, one of at least 90 Ahar culture sites in the basins of the Ahar and Banas rivers, and where the skeletal remains of a 2,700-year-old yogi were found, sitting in a state of what is called samadhi, a meditative consciousness in which human consciousness becomes one with cosmic consciousness. The Bil Minas tribe was the ruling tribe before the Mewar Kingdom forced them to hide out in the Aravalli Hills, and they were named a criminal tribe by the British government in 1924 to keep them from regaining power. They were subsequently given protection as a scheduled tribe after the upliftment in 1949 of the Criminal Tribe Act, which had been enacted on October 12th of 1871. The Criminal Tribes Act of 1871 criminalized entire communities by designating them as habitual criminals, and restrictions on their movements were imposed, including men having to report to the police once per week. A scheduled tribe is recognized by the Indian Constitution, has political representation, and yet they are legally, totally, or partially excluded from various types of services important for leading a healthy life. And altogether, the scheduled tribes of India make up almost 10% of the population and are considered India's poorest people. This is a panoramic view of Udaipur's old city, which was said to date back to the city's founding by the Mewar king Maharana Uda Singh II in 1558. Udaipur is a great case study of the marginalization and even criminalization of the Earth's ancient indigenous people and the rewritten history to explain the existence of their masterful infrastructure. The next place on the alignment is Jodhpur, the second largest city of India's Rajasthan state and historically the capital of the Kingdom of Marwar. Also known as the Blue City, Jodhpur is dominated by Mehrangarh Fort. Mehrangarh Fort is one of the largest forts in India, situated 410 feet or 125 meters above the city and enclosed by thick walls. It was said to have been built by Rao Jodha, the 15th Rathore ruler, starting in 1459, who we are told was the founder of Jodhpur. Also called the Citadel of the Sun, inside the walls of Mehrangarh Fort, there are several palaces known for their intricate carvings and expansive courtyards. The palaces of Mehrangarh Fort constitute one of the finest museums in Rajasthan. In 2016, Jodhpur, along with Mumbai, made it on the list of the world's most inspiring cities. The Umaid Bhawan Palace in Jodhpur is one of the world's largest private residences. It was said to have been built starting in 1929 by the Maharaja Udaipur Singh as the principal residence of the former Jodhpur royal family, and still owned by the family in the present day. We are told the Maharaja decided to build the palace to help the farmers of Jodhpur, who had just experienced a severe famine, and that he commissioned the British architect Henry von Lancaster for the design of the palace. We are told it took 2,000 to 3,000 farmers 14 years to complete the construction project, which took place in 1943, which was in the middle of World War II. A part of the palace is managed by Taj Hotels, and it recently received an award as the world's best hotel. Jodhpur is situated next to the Thar Desert, also known as the Great Indian Desert, covering about 66,000 square miles, or 170,000 kilometers squared. I wonder if there's enduring infrastructure underneath all those sand dunes. The next place I would like to look at is a city on the other side of the Thar Desert from Jodhpur, which is Bikaner, also in India's Rajasthan state. Formerly the capital of the princely state of Bikaner, it was said to have been founded in 1488 AD by Rao Bika, the son of Rao Jodha, the founder of Jodhpur. The Ganga Canal, also known as the Ganga Canal of Rajasthan, was said to have been an irrigation system of canals built between 1925 and 1927 by Maharaja Ganga Singh of Bikaner. The Indira Gandhi Canal runs near here as well. It is the longest canal in India and was said to have been completed in 1983. It runs 400 miles or 650 kilometers from northern India to irrigation facilities in the Thar Desert. Junagarh Fort in Bikaner was said to have been built between 1589 and 1594. While it was said in records that in its history the fort was attacked by enemies in an effort to capture it, the fort complex is also studded with palaces, temples, and pavilions. Lalgarh Palace is a palace and heritage hotel in Bikaner, located near the Junagarh Fort. It has a story somewhat similar to the Umaid Bhawan Palace back in Jodhpur. Lalgarh Palace was said to have been commissioned by the British-controlled Regency for Maharaja Ganga Singh while he was still in his minority, because they considered the existing Junagarh Fort Palace as unsuitable for a modern monarch. Here is a comparison of the two palace complexes in Bikaner, so that you can see that they are built in a similar style, and Lalgarh Palace doesn't appear to have been modernized in comparison of the two. Lalgarh's construction was said to have begun in 1902, with the complex having been designed in Indo-Saracenic style by British architect Sir Samuel Jacob Swinton and completed in 1926. The last place I'm going to look at in this video on this alignment is Multan, the major cultural and economic center of the southern Punjab province of Pakistan. Multan's history stretches way back into antiquity. Multan was the location of the ancient Multan Sun Temple, said to date back 5,000 years, which would make it contemporaneous with the Neolithic complex of Avebury in southern England, and the Watson Brake Mounds in Richwood, Louisiana, near Monroe and Poverty Point. Watson Brake is dated to 5,400 years ago and is considered the oldest earthwork mound complex in North America. Note the summer and winter solstice alignments depicted here in this diagram of Watson Brake. This is the entrance to what is called the Multan Fort on the left, and for comparison on the right is the Soldiers and Sailors Memorial Arch at Bushnell Park in Hartford, Connecticut. The ancient Harappan civilization of this region, also known as the Indus River Valley Civilization, was known for their urban planning, baked brick buildings, elaborate drainage systems, water supply systems, clusters of large non-residential buildings, and metallurgy. I even read where they had street lights and extremely accurate systems of weights and measures. Multan was one of the most important trading centers of medieval Islamic India and attracted a multitude of Sufi mystics in the 11th and 12th centuries and is known as the City of the Saints. Multan is renowned for its large number of Sufi shrines from that time, as well as the Sufi shrines in the nearby city of Uch, of which the original shrines seem to be missing large chunks from the original architecture. As I mentioned previously, Sufis were mystics and practitioners of the inward dimension of Islam. Sufism emphasizes personal experience with the divine and concentrating one's energy on spiritual development. So here we have been passing through this part of the world known as a highly spiritual place with people actively pursuing a deep personal connection with the divine. It is interesting to note that we find the Sri Jasnath Ashram in the Thar Desert, in the Nagaur district of Rajasthan, between Jodhpur and Bikaner. This yogic retreat is in the village of Panchla Siddha, or place of deep meditation, said to have been founded over 500 years ago and considered a place highly charged with spiritual energy. In the Mahabharata, a major Sanskrit epic of India, a magical weapon described as a Brahmastra was said to have been detonated at the end of the 18-day battle of Kurukshetra. A Brahmastra was said to have been a single projectile charged with all the power in the universe. Any target hit by the Brahmastra would be utterly destroyed, land would become barren and lifeless, rainfall would cease, and humans and animals would become infertile. The Pandavas were said to have vanquished their enemy, the Kauravas, with the devastating weapon, but the few surviving Pandavas discovered there was nothing left to occupy and no one left to rule. The Brahmastra had turned the region of present-day Rajasthan to desert. Well, to support this, evidence exists that exactly this part of the world was devastated by nuclear war at some point in time. Perhaps in ancient times as suggested here in this reference, but I believe it could have taken place much, much more recently in time than what we are told. As a result of my research tracking various ley lines, I have come to believe that there was deliberately caused cataclysmic destruction of the Earth's surface along the Earth's grid system in order to bring about the New World Order, causing the land to undulate and buckle, causing among other things swamps, bogs, deserts, dunes, and whole land masses to shear off and submerge under seas and oceans. I believe that the circuit board of the Earth's grid system was deliberately blown out as the result of one or more forms of directed frequency or directed energy of some kind into different places on the Earth's grid, either at the same time or different times within a finite period, because there's just so much devastation covering the entire surface of the Earth. And that ever since then we have been at the mercy of a parasitic consciousness that has rigged the system to provide the nonstop flow of wealth for them and converting our natural divine source energy into the negative energy of our lowest states of consciousness of fear and suffering that they need to survive. Here are more thoughts on what I think has really been going on here. The Pashtun tribal peoples are the primary inhabitants of Pakistan and Afghanistan in a region regarded as Pashtunistan, which became split between the two countries since the formation of the Durand Line border between these two countries in 1893 after the Second Anglo-Afghan War. The namesake of the line, Sir Henry Mortimer Durand, was a British diplomat and civil servant of the British Raj. We are told that together with the Afghan emir, Abdur Rahman Khan, it was established to fix the limit of their respective spheres of influence and improve diplomatic relations and trade. Well, that certainly sounds good. But what was really going on here? The Durand Line cuts through the Pashtunistan and Balochistan regions, politically dividing ethnic Pashtuns and Balak, who live on both sides of the border. But really, why divide a people in this fashion? The Pashtun are a tribal nation of millions of Afghani and Pakistani Muslims who also have a strong oral tradition that they are descendants of lost tribes of Israel, and they refer to themselves as Bani Israel. Here's an example of a Pashtun textile piece showing the sacred geometric shape of a star tetrahedron in the center, also commonly known as the Star of David. So according to the history we have been taught, how can the Pashtun be Hebrew, Israelites, and Muslim at the same time? For many reasons, this is a good opportunity to share why I think there was one original spiritual tradition, and that organized religion came in with the hijack of the original timeline for the purposes of control and serving an agenda not in humanity's best interest. Not long ago, I realized that Earth's true history was not about organized religions, which was a stumbling block for me because of what we have been taught. The controllers didn't rewrite history from scratch. They rewrote the historical narrative to fit their agenda. And from the new official historical reset year, which I believe was 1850 or 1851, we have been immersed in learning their history of what has taken place here from a very young age. I have found this symbol contained within the 12 main constellations and the 12 tribes of Israel in many different places. Like the Mughal garden complex in Lahore, known as the Shalimar Gardens, on the left and on the right, the same design patterns are seen on the Great Exhibition brochure for the Crystal Palace exhibition in London in 1851, also known as the Great Shalimar. I believe the Crystal Palace exhibition was the official kickoff of the New World Order timeline we have been living on. I find this 8-pointed star everywhere, including, but far from being limited to, the Mabel Tainter Theater in Menominee, Wisconsin, and the exquisitely crafted interior of the Imam Riza Shrine in Mashhad, Iran. Does it make sense that the original world was inherently destructive and constantly at odds, as we are taught, when it was capable of creating such beauty and harmony in diverse places? The identity of the true Israelites of the worldwide ancient advanced Moorish civilization was co-opted by the Khazarian Jews and Zionists. The Rothschilds purchased Jerusalem in 1829 and subsequently acquired considerable land in Palestine in the 1800s and early 1900s. Great Britain was granted a colonial mandate for Palestine and Transjordan by the League of Nations on April 25th of 1920, which lasted until the formation of Israel in May of 1948. A League of Nations mandate was a legal status for certain territories transferred from the control of one country to another after World War I, in this case territories that were conceded by the Ottoman Empire following the end of World War I in 1918. Despite growing conflict between Palestinian Arabs and Palestinian Jews, 32nd degree Freemason Harry S. Truman ultimately decided to recognize Israel. David Ben-Gurion proclaimed the establishment of the modern State of Israel on May 14th of 1948, and President Truman recognized the new nation on the same day. Also on the same day, the new State of Israel was proclaimed, and the British Army had withdrawn. Gunfire broke out between Jews and Arabs, and Egypt had launched an air assault that evening. Several years ago, I read and internalized the information in Key 215, verse 70 of the Keys of Enoch, transcribed by J.J. Hertog. This particular key really reached out and grabbed my attention. The keys collectively explain how the divine is extended and manifested through higher thought forms that unfold throughout all realms of life. One of the places mentioned in this key I am about to share was Lop Nor in China, which I was already familiar with being a nuclear test site because I had found and studied it in my earlier work by connecting the dots and following the alignments I had found around the world. There are other nuclear test sites that I know of besides the ones listed below on the Earth's grid system. Novaya Zemlya, a large island in the Arctic Ocean off the northern coast of Russia, is one, and another is Regani, Algeria, where the French did nuclear testing. I'm sure there are others as well. This awareness led me to make the intuitive jump into looking for and compiling the following information from looking up these places on the internet, using among other things the word nuclear or nuclear tests. So Key 215 verse 70 reads, accordingly, the 12 energy grid areas for space-time transcription and areas of proto-communication established by the conversion of each tribe of Israel for the watch and deliverance of the present program from the treasury of light are the areas of 1. Aral Sea Kungrad in Uzbekistan. The shrinking of the Aral Sea, diverted by irrigation projects, has been called one of the Earth's worst environmental disasters, and the region is heavily polluted. 2. Taklamaklon, Lopnor Sinkiang. Lopnor is an ancient salt lake in the Taklamaklon Desert in the southeastern portion of the Uyghur Autonomous Region in Xinjiang in China. Chinese nuclear weapons test base had 4 nuclear testing zones from 1959 with H-bomb detonation in 1967 until 1996 with 45 nuclear tests conducted. 3. The Philippine Islands. The 1965 Philippine Sea A-4 crash was a broken arrow incident in which a U.S. Navy A-4E Skyhawk attack aircraft carrying a nuclear weapon fell into the sea from the aircraft carrier USS Ticonderoga. Described as a free-fall nuclear weapon on a handling dolly on December 5th of 1965. A broken arrow incident is defined as an unexpected event involving nuclear weapons that result in the accidental launching, firing, detonating, theft, or loss of the weapon. To date, 6 nuclear weapons have been lost and never recovered. 4. The Kwajalein Marshall Islands. The location of the Pacific Proving Grounds, which was the name given by the United States government to a number of sites in the Marshall Islands and a few other sites in the Pacific Ocean between 1946 and 1962. 105 atmospheric and underwater nuclear tests were conducted in the Pacific. The Marshall Islands comprised 80% of tested yields at 210 megatons. 5. The Hawaiian Islands. The location of the Pearl Harbor attack in 1942, which brought the United States into World War II. Johnston Atoll was controlled by the military for 70 years and used for testing and as a chemical weapon and Agent Orange storage and disposal site. Kaho'olawe Island was used as a bombing range by the armed forces during World War II and was known as the Target Isle. 6. Vancouver Island. A Mark IV nuclear device dumped or exploded off the coast was found on February 13th of 1950, similar to the atomic bomb that was dropped on Nagasaki. The American B-36 bomber carrying it crashed en route from Alaska to Texas. 7. From Pueblo, Colorado to the Mescalero Apache Reservation of New Mexico. It is important to note that contained within the location described are both Trinity Site, the first nuclear test detonation site near the Mescalero Apache Indian Reservation, as is Los Alamos National Labs, which was established in 1943 as Site Y of the Manhattan Project to design and build the first atomic bomb, still in use today. 8. From Lexington, Kentucky to Tennessee. The Oak Ridge National Labs is in Oak Ridge, Tennessee, with a nickname of the Atomic City. It was established in 1943 as part of the Manhattan Project. It was chosen as a site for a graphite reactor to create plutonium from uranium, still in use for nuclear research and development. 9. Nova Scotia connecting with the Bermuda Islands. The date of the Halifax explosion was December 6th of 1917, when a ship collision in the harbor caused a 2.9 kiloton detonation of TNT, killing at least 2,000 people and injuring 9,000. It was the largest man-made explosion prior to the development of nuclear weapons. 10. The Azores. There was a broken arrow incident on May 22nd of 1968 involving the loss of a nuclear reactor and 2 W-34 nuclear warheads when a U.S. submarine sank from unknown causes approximately 400 nautical miles southwest of the Azores. Lourdes, France. Nothing that I know of, however, it is a major Catholic pilgrimage site, known both as a location for an appearance of the Virgin Mary here to a young woman in 1858, and a place for spring water with healing and miraculous healings. And 12. Giza in Egypt. And while nothing I know of directly, I do know that at one time the body of the Sphinx, for example, was covered by desert sands and had to be dug out to show what we see today. They want us to believe it is the result of the passage of time and natural processes, but I definitely question what the official narrative tells us about anything. I find it more than statistically significant that at least 10 out of the 12 places listed as being the 12 important energy grid areas for the space-time transcription of each tribe of Israel had some kind of environmental disaster, nuclear testing facilities and or test site locations, nuclear accidents, or some kind of massive explosion. As I mentioned earlier, I see all of this as an extremely hostile destruction and takeover of the Earth's grid system and the original advanced ancient human civilization. And this was done in a war against the Creator and creation through manipulating humanity in much lower consciousness than it was before all of this took place. And what we know today as India went from having fabulous wealth and a high standard of living to the third world conditions that exist in many places for many people there today. The same thing can be said about most, if not all, the world's countries, especially compared with what was actually here before the reset event and new historical timeline. Moorish Islam was originally all about I, self, law, am master, and was not the Islam we see operating as a destructive force in the world today. And Moorish Masons of the original civilization built all of the world's infrastructure, not Western Freemasons, who stole the identity and legacy of the original Masons for their own purposes and agendas. Islam was turned into the weaponized belief system we see today that was developed to divide and conquer by the Western Freemasons, as seen in this quote by the Freemason Albert Pike. Pike was the Sovereign Grand Commander of the Supreme Council of the Scottish Rite's Southern Jurisdiction from 1859 to 1891, and a major player during the American Civil War and in the development of Western Freemasonry, with his publication of Morals and Dogma of the Ancient Accepted Rite of Freemasonry in 1871, the same year as this quote about the Third World War. And were the children of Israel originally called the children of As-Arel? I know it's all very confusing, but that's because everything is meant to confuse us. It's much easier to control us when we don't know what's true and what's not. Heavy programming on the divide and conquer side, and light on the unity side. Earlier in this video, I expressed an idea that the Nazi obsession with creating a master race was based on recreating the original Aryans, who were members of a worldwide advanced civilization known as Arata, which is now recognized as the world's most ancient known civilization. Barata, Varsha, was said to be a name for ancient India, but this illustration depicts much more than the Indian subcontinent. I tracked the R sound that's contained in many historic place names, like some of the ones I mentioned here: Armenia, Bavaria, Barbaria, Tartaria, Arabia, and Arizona. These are R sounds I referenced in this video alone: Mewar, Akbar, Kumbhalgarh, Aravalli, Maharana, Maharaja, Ahar culture of the Harappan civilization, Thar Desert, and the Mahabharata. There are so many R's to be found when you start to look. There is even an R to be found in the spelling of Earth. When I first started my research several years ago, I thought that with all of the detailed history of India in the historical narrative we were given, it wasn't destroyed like other places and had to be taken down by other means. As mentioned earlier, this is a picture of the Qutub Shahi tombs from the Golkonda fort in Hyderabad, India, circa 1902 or 1903. And this photo was said to be at the Kuldabad rest house near the Ellora caves circa 1890. As I stated previously in this video, I believe that worldwide cataclysmic events were deliberately caused by one or more forms of directed frequency or directed energy of some kind into different places on the Earth's grid in order to bring about the New World Order, wiping out the original ancient advanced Moorish civilization and erasing it from our collective memory. A new historical narrative was created based on the underpinnings of the original civilization, but original meanings and intents were twisted and subverted in order to create a system of control for humanity. I also believe we are living in times of great change. We are seeing some of what was planned for us by the controllers playing out right now, but I believe we are on the verge of a great change and shift that will change everything for the better, and soon.